It's July 25th, 1944, and the morning air over Normandy feels thick and oppressive, the kind of humidity that clings to your skin and makes everything feel heavier than it should. To anyone glancing at the hedgerows west of St. Lo, the landscape looks almost peaceful, just sleepy French farmland divided by ancient walls of earth and tangled roots that have stood for centuries, creating a natural maze across the countryside. But Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein knows the truth behind this deceptive calm. Sitting inside his reinforced command post, a bunker buried deep beneath packed earth and wooden beams, Bayerlein understands exactly what these hedgerows represent. They're not just boundaries between fields. They're a fortress, and for 6 brutal weeks they've stopped the most powerful military force the world has ever assembled. Despite everything the Americans have thrown at his positions, despite their superior numbers and resources, Bayerlein has held the line, and this morning he feels something he's felt for months now, a quiet, unshakable confidence in German tactical superiority. Then at precisely 9:38 in the morning, Bayerlein hears something that doesn't belong on any battlefield he's ever experienced. It's not the high-pitched scream of fighter-bombers diving toward his tanks, not the familiar sounds of artillery or small arms fire. This is something entirely different, a deep, rhythmic, mechanical thunder that seems to come from everywhere at once, from below his feet, from beside him, from the very air itself, and it sounds less like weapons and more like a factory running at full capacity. You have to understand who Fritz Bayerlein is to appreciate what happens next. He's not just another tank commander trying to hold a defensive line. He commands the Panzer Lehr Division, and the word Lehr means teacher in German. This division exists for one singular purpose: to teach the art of armored warfare to the next generation of German officers. Unlike most combat units formed from regular soldiers and draftees, the Panzer Lehr was assembled from the Wehrmacht's absolute finest instructors, men who spent years at the Panzerschule, the Armored Warfare Academy, passing on the sacred knowledge of tank tactics to thousands of young officers. Every captain, every sergeant, every corporal in this division has months or even years of experience teaching other soldiers how to fight, how to think, how to survive on the modern battlefield. Bayerlein himself is something of a legend in German military circles, a veteran who fought under Rommel himself in the scorching deserts of North Africa, a man who commanded tanks across endless sand and learned mechanized warfare at the very highest level. He's faced American forces before and survived, studied their tactics, understood their strengths and weaknesses. The Panzer Lehr isn't just elite in the normal sense of that word. It's elite in a way that most military formations can never achieve. Every single man in this division has received more formal tactical training than an entire American infantry company combined. They understand the geometry of armored warfare, how the angle of a tank's sloped armor can deflect an incoming shell, how to read terrain and position themselves in reverse-sloped defenses where enemy artillery observers can't possibly spot them. They comprehend the intricate choreography of combined arms warfare, how infantry supports tanks, how tanks support anti-tank guns, how everything works together in synchronized deadly precision. Compare this to the average American soldier who's been drafted straight from his farm in Iowa or his factory job in Detroit, given 12 weeks of basic training at some camp in Georgia or Texas, and then shipped across the Atlantic. These American soldiers have courage, absolutely. They've proven that again and again, but they lack the depth of training, the understanding of how to fight a thinking opponent who's studied warfare as an art form. For the past month, Bayerlein has watched the Americans bleed themselves dry trying to break through the bocage. The American First Army has suffered 40,000 casualties, 40,000 young men killed, or wounded or missing, and they've advanced less than 7 miles. 7 miles in 4 weeks of continuous fighting. The Germans call it a sniper war, a brutal, grinding war of inches, a war of attrition that plays perfectly to German tactical strengths. Bayerlein can sense the frustration in American radio traffic. The same complaints repeated over and over. The terrain defeats them. The defenders are too well positioned. The intricate dance of hedgerow warfare breaks their spirit before they even make contact. Meanwhile, Bayerlein's division has dug in with methodical German precision. His tanks sit in carefully prepared reverse slope positions, hidden in the shadows of the hedgerows where American artillery spotters will never see them. His infantry occupies prepared fighting positions with overlapping fields of fire calculated down to the meter. His anti-tank guns hide in carefully chosen kill zones, places where American tank commanders won't see them until a muzzle flash appears and the round is already on its way. Bayerlein believes he has the Americans trapped in an impossible situation. He checks his map at 9:30 that morning, just 8 minutes before everything changes forever. His dispositions look perfect on paper. The defensive lines are solid. The fields of fire are prepared. He expects another day of small-scale American probing attacks, infantry trying to push through the hedgerows and getting caught in carefully orchestrated machine gun fire. Another day of holding the line and proving that German tactical excellence trumps American industrial brute force. He doesn't expect the world to end. Bayerlein steps outside his bunker because the sound keeps getting louder and stranger. He's heard bombers before, plenty of times. He survived air attacks in North Africa, watched bombing raids, learned to recognize the sounds of different aircraft. But this is completely different. This isn't a tactical bombing run in support of ground troops. This isn't even a strategic raid on a supply depot or headquarters. This is something he's never experienced, and when he looks up toward the north, his confidence instantly turns to ice-cold fear. The sky isn't blue anymore. Instead, there's a solid ceiling of aluminum stretching from horizon to horizon, hundreds of bombers stacked into formations so impossibly dense they literally block out the sun. Wave after wave, formation after formation, thousands upon thousands of tons of aircraft filling the entire visible sky, like some kind of conveyor belt of death flowing in from the north. The American 8th Air Force, the most powerful air armada the world has ever seen, is bringing its entire strategic bombing fleet to bear on a single patch of French farmland. These aren't individual fighter bombers hunting for tactical targets. These are 1,500 4-engine strategic heavy bombers, B-17 flying fortresses, and B-24 liberators, machines specifically designed to destroy entire cities like Berlin and Hamburg, machines built to level residential blocks with a single pass. And right now, they're all converging on the exact spot where Bayerlein's division is dug in. General Omar Bradley has made a decision that will change the nature of warfare forever. If he can't outmaneuver the German army through superior tactics, if he can't win through discipline and skill, he'll simply use American industrial capacity to erase the grid square they're occupying. He'll turn the earth itself into a weapon. Bayerlein would later write in his memoirs about what he felt in that instant, and his words carry the weight of a man watching his entire world collapse. He wrote that he looked up and saw the end of the world coming toward them, that the bombers came as if on a conveyor belt, and that he knew in that moment it was the end. In that single terrible instant, the entire balance of the war shifts. Not because the Americans have suddenly become better tacticians than the Germans. Not because Bayerlein has made some crucial mistake in his defensive planning, but because he's about to discover a truth that the German military high command has been refusing to acknowledge for years now. Courage is no longer enough to win wars. Tactical brilliance is no longer enough. Even the best training the Wehrmacht can produce is no longer enough when facing an enemy with truly unlimited industrial capacity. What's about to happen isn't warfare in any traditional sense that Bayerlein or anyone in his generation would recognize. It's industrial erasure on a scale that human minds aren't designed to comprehend. To really understand the magnitude of what Bayerlein is witnessing, you have to grasp the mathematics behind modern industrial warfare. The operation has been codenamed Cobra, and the plan is brutally simple in concept. American infantry units have pulled back precisely 1,200 yards, carefully measured with surveying equipment, and confirmed multiple times to create what they're calling a safety zone. Into the rectangle of French farmland directly ahead of them, the United States Army is about to pour 4,000 tons of high explosives in just 60 minutes. 4,000 tons. Try to wrap your mind around that number. The entire payload of explosives being dropped is equivalent to the weight of Bayerlein's entire Panzer Lehr Division, with every single tank, every gun, every truck, every piece of ammunition it possesses. Imagine the weight of an entire division, thousands of vehicles and tons of equipment, and now imagine that same weight, but made entirely of pure explosive power falling from the sky. And it's all coming down in 1 hour. Bayerlein's division holds a frontage of approximately 3 miles, 3 miles of defensive line that they've spent weeks fortifying. They're about to receive more explosive tonnage than all the bombs that fell on Britain during the entire Blitz. 3 years of German bombing compressed into 60 minutes, not spread over months or weeks, but delivered in one concentrated hour of sustained bombardment. This isn't war as anyone in 1944 understands it. This is an industrial demolition project, and the Panzer Lehr Division is sitting directly in the center of the demolition zone. For the first time in months, Bayerlein feels real fear, not the tactical concern of a commander weighing his options before battle, not the professional anxiety of a soldier preparing for combat, but the primitive animal terror of a human being who understands he's about to witness industrial slaughter on a scale his mind cannot process, a scale that exceeds normal human imagination. At 9:40 in the morning, just 2 minutes after Bayerlein seized the bomber stream, the lead bombardiers release their loads, and everything changes. They call it carpet bombing for a reason. The bombs don't fall as individual munitions, giving defenders time to react or flee or organize some kind of response. They fall in continuous sheets like rain, like an industrial product flowing off an assembly line, relentless and utterly indifferent to the human suffering below. The physics of the battlefield transform instantly. When the first wave of bombs hits the earth, the shock wave is so powerful it creates a vacuum, and trees that have stood for 500 years are stripped of their branches in an instant, not snapped or broken, but stripped clean, as if some massive factory machine has peeled away every leaf and twig in one mechanical motion. Hedgerows that have defined the French landscape for centuries simply vaporize, cease to exist in any recognizable form. The earth itself becomes a continuous wave of pressure beyond the threshold of human hearing. It's not really sound anymore. It's a physical force that ruptures eardrums and collapses lungs, even without a single fragment of shrapnel touching flesh. Just the shock wave, just the pressure of air molecules moving at lethal velocity. Inside the German bunkers, the reinforced earth begins to shake. Then it begins to move. Then it begins to actually liquefy under the incredible force being applied from above. The lights go out instantly. The telephone lines, those carefully prepared underground communications lines that connect the command post to every unit in the division, go dead. Radio operators scream into their headsets, but hear only static, static, and the roar of a world being systematically pulverized above them. The nervous system of the Panzer Lehr has been severed completely. Command and control simply cease to exist. There's no more strategy, no more tactics, no more careful coordination. There's only survival in the dark. But the bombing doesn't stop, and it doesn't slow down. It continues for 60 full minutes. Try to imagine sitting in a dark hole underground while the world above you is being systematically destroyed second by second for an entire hour. Minute 1, Minute 2, Minute 3, and you don't know when it will end. You don't know if it will ever end. You don't know if the earth above you will eventually give way and bury you alive in your own bunker. A 50-ton Panther tank buried in one of the forward positions becomes nothing more than a toy when the earth underneath it liquefies from sustained bombardment. The armor that would normally stop an American 75mm anti-tank round becomes completely irrelevant. The tank tips onto its side, and its crew suffocates in the darkness as soil pours down through the fighting compartment like sand through an hourglass. This scene repeats itself again and again across the entire 3-mile front, tank after tank, gun after gun, man after man. The numbers are what make industrial warfare so absolutely terrifying to anyone who truly understands them. 1,500 heavy bombers, each B-17 Flying Fortress carrying approximately 8,000 pounds of high explosives. That's 12 million pounds of TNT for 1,000 tons of explosives dropped in 60 minutes. To put this in perspective, Bayerlein's entire Panzer Lehr Division, with all its tanks and guns and ammunition and supplies and vehicles and fuel, weighs less than half the tonnage of explosives being dropped on their positions right now. The weight of an entire elite division rendered in pure explosive power falling from the sky in one concentrated hour. American industrial capacity has finally entered the war in a way that German military planners never imagined possible. This isn't a battle in any traditional sense. This is production. This is manufacturing applied to warfare. This is what happens when a nation with seemingly unlimited industrial resources, unlimited fuel, unlimited raw materials, unlimited labor capacity, decides to solve a tactical military problem using assembly line methods. The Germans invented blitzkrieg. They pioneered combined arms warfare. They wrote the definitive textbook on modern tank tactics. They're acknowledged as the masters of maneuver warfare, and German officers still study their own doctrine in military academies across Europe. But they never invented industrial-scale warfare on this level. Bayerlein's entire pre-war training never prepared him for this, because in pre-war German military theory, in all the careful calculations made by German staff planners throughout the 1930s, no nation on Earth was supposed to have the capacity to produce this much concentrated firepower. It was literally beyond the boundaries of German military imagination. It exceeded their calculations and expectations and fundamental understanding of what was possible in modern war. The scale of American production isn't just bigger than German production. It exists in a categorically different dimension. When Germany produces at absolute full capacity, they manage about 1,500 fighter aircraft per month, roughly 1,200 Messerschmitt Bf 109s combined with another 300 to 400 Focke-Wulf FW 190s. Even with every German factory working at maximum output, with all available resources allocated to aircraft production, they can produce about 1,500 fighters per month. But America produces over 2,000 fighters every single month, and that's not even counting bombers or transport aircraft. That's just fighters alone. It's roughly a 3-to-1 advantage, and by mid-1944 that advantage has become mathematically insurmountable, an impossible gap that no amount of German tactical skill can overcome. At 11 o'clock in the morning, after 60 full minutes of sustained bombardment, the engines finally fade away. A strange ringing silence falls over the St. Lo area, though it's not peace, and it's not really quiet either. It's the screaming silence that comes from shell shock and concussion, from a world that no longer makes any sense, a silence so complete it seems to have physical weight pressing down on everything. Bayerlein crawls out of his bunker, covered from head to toe in thick, gray chalky dust. He looks like a ghost, like someone who's been pulled from an ancient tomb. His ears ring with a high-pitched whine that may never go away, a sound he'll carry with him for the rest of his life. He stumbles toward his staff car, desperate to regain control of his division, because that's what commanders do. They re-establish command. They organize counterattacks. They do something to restore military order and discipline. He tries to drive forward to inspect his defensive lines, but he can't because the roads are simply gone, not blocked by debris or cratered by bombs, but actually gone, vaporized and rearranged into a lunar landscape that looks like nothing on Earth. What he finds is a graveyard. The Panzer Lehr's 60-ton Panther tanks are buried up to their turrets in loose soil, and their crews have suffocated inside, without a single bullet hole or piece of shrapnel damage. Just slow suffocation in the pitch dark while the earth shifted beneath them like an earthquake. Anti-tank guns are twisted into completely unrecognizable masses of scrap metal. Ammunition trucks lie overturned and burned out. But the worst discovery isn't the destroyed equipment, it's the survivors. Bayerlein finds men wandering aimlessly through the crater-filled moonscape, some bleeding from their ears, some trying to speak, but producing no words, their mouths moving silently. They're what Bayerlein will later officially report as dazed and crazed. These aren't men who've been defeated in honest combat. These are men who've been processed through an industrial machine and emerged on the other side as something less than human. The elite veterans of the Panzer Lehr, men specifically selected because they were the best tactical instructors the Wehrmacht could offer, are now standing vacant-eyed and staring at nothing. They don't salute when Bayerlein approaches. They don't follow orders. They don't even respond to their own names. They've been broken not by courage or determination or superior tactics, but by physics and mathematics, by the pure laws of industrial power applied to human flesh. Bayerlein sends a message to Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, and it becomes one of the most famous military dispatches of the entire Second World War. Every word carries the weight of complete realization. He writes that his division is annihilated, that the men are crazed, that the equipment is buried, and that he is now the commander of nothing. At 11:30 in the morning, just 30 minutes after the bombing stops, American tanks start their engines and begin to roll forward. The U.S. First Army moves out expecting the worst. Bayerlein has prepared for this moment for weeks. He's constructed elaborate defenses, positioned anti-tank guns in carefully calculated kill zones, created overlapping fields of fire designed to turn advancing American armor into a death trap. The Americans expect a wall of anti-tank fire. They expect the same ferocious, disciplined resistance they've faced for 6 brutal weeks in the bocage. Instead, they find nothing. There's no coherent resistance because there's no working communication system. There's no command structure left intact. There's no functioning military organization remaining on the German side of the line. Operation Cobra has worked exactly as planned. The stalemate is shattered. American armored columns drive straight through the gap where the Panzer Lehr Division used to exist. They pour into Brittany and then swing east toward Paris. The entire German front in Normandy doesn't just retreat in good order, it collapses completely, falls apart like a building that's lost its foundation. General Fritz Bayerlein escapes with just a handful of his staff officers, but his elite division is left behind scattered across the craters around St. Lo. The Panzer Lehr Division, formed from the Wehrmacht's absolute best training instructors, has been reduced to scattered survivors wandering aimlessly through a moonscape. Operation Cobra proved a terrifying new truth about modern warfare that would define the rest of World War II and change military thinking forever. Individual courage has become obsolete as a decisive factor. Tactical brilliance no longer determines the outcome of battles. Even the best training the German army can possibly produce isn't enough anymore when facing an enemy that can turn an entire grid square of Earth into dust using an industrial assembly line of strategic bombers. When you face a nation that can field 1,500 heavy bombers in a single concentrated operation, when you face a military-industrial complex that produces more tanks in a single month than you can manufacture in an entire year, individual valor becomes mathematically irrelevant. As Bayerlein stood in the dust of his destroyed army, he understood a fundamental truth that would shape the rest of the war and haunt him for the remainder of his life. The war was already lost, and it had been lost for a while. Not because the Americans were better soldiers than his men. Bayerlein knew better than that. His men were the absolute elite of the Wehrmacht, the best trained, the most tactically sophisticated. But the Americans had transformed warfare itself into an engineering project, and industrial projects don't care about courage or tactical skill or years of training or proud military traditions. They only care about production numbers and horsepower and tonnage delivered on target. The project was finished and Germany had lost this war the moment Omar Bradley decided to solve a tactical military problem with a pure industrial solution.